Go ahead and call the Senate to order. Sergeant at Arms will please secure the chamber doors. Members, please take your seats. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Mr. President.
All right, Senators, we are very pleased on this Wednesday, March 12th, to have Reverend Dr. Brenda D. White of the Allen African Methodist Episcopal Church in Baltimore, Maryland, guest of the distinguished senator from the 40th District. Please rise for the invocation.
Good morning.
Good morning.
In the season of our greatest challenges, that we can embrace the life-giving, wise sayings of our four parents. Make your point without making enemies. No one can exceed the limitations of his or her own mind. Excuses are the tools of the incompetent. They build bridges to nowhere. These anecdotal sayings are to be shared, to encourage each other, and to create a sense of inner peace and hope, even in times of uncertainty. The underlying wisdom within them comes from the spiritual essence of a shared experience. Oral or written, wise sayings can strengthen our collective spiritual core. It is comforting to remember having heard it said, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted. He rescues those whose spirits are crushed." Psalms 78, 1 through 8 reminds us to open our ears. God will teach us the hidden lessons to be learned from stories of our ancestors handed down. We are to tell them to the next generation and the generation after that, to teach the yet unborn the glorious actions of the power of the Lord. The hymnologist wrote, and we can affirm, "O thou, in whose presence our soul takes delight, on whom in affliction I call, my comfort by day and my song by night, my hope, my salvation, my all." As we gather in this hallowed chamber for this legislative session, let us affirm that our best days are ahead of us. Let us commit to building a history and not resting on one. Most gracious Holy One, bless these state senators. Keep them, their loved ones, their staff safe. Protect their health and well-being. Give them restful sleep. Give them the courage to do what is right, to love, to walk humbly, and to care for each other. Holy One, allow them to see that there's something inside of us so strong is the love of God. May each member of this elected body reflect your steadfast love. Amen.
Amen. Well said. Thank you. That was wonderful. Recognize the senator from the 40th District.
Thank you, Mr. President. What a word, what a mighty word shared with us this morning. I'm honored once again to welcome, in the spirit of Women's History Month, the pastor from my district, Reverend White, who actively works in the 40th District. She's a coalition builder, working side by side with public and private partners to deliver services to the homeless, elderly, and families and children. She's joined today, Mr. President, on the floor by the Reverend Dr. Harriet McCombs. If she would please stand. Mr. President, I ask that we journalize the prayer this morning.
Without objection, most certainly, we will journalize the prayer and welcome her, and thank you so much for being here with us. We are so thankful for you. We say we always need some more love, so it's a good reminder to start the day. All right. Has everyone recorded their presence? Everyone recorded their presence? Looks like we're missing a few. Can we get the excellent. All right, it's from the center from the 25th. 25th district. There we go. Excellent. All right. The clerk will take the call. With 44 members in the chamber and a quorum being present, the Senate of Maryland is again back in session. I'm feeling a bit self-conscious this morning. Last night, I was reading to Cora, who was visiting last week, and she stopped in the middle and said, "Dad, when I visited yesterday or last week, you do that thing where you say, like, as everyone recorded their vote, as everyone take their vote," and she said, "You sound really skibbity." And I was like, "Wait, what?" She was like, "You sound terrible." So I feel like I'm all in my head today of like, how do I actually say it out loud? So, we'll see how it goes. But, there's nothing like a daughter to tell you exactly how terrible you're doing, So here we are. Yes. All right, let's see. Do we have any introductions? Any introductions today? Any introductions? Yes, Senator from the 42nd.
Thank you, Mr. President. Somewhere up in the galleries are students from Delaney High School, which is in my district. Everybody stand up, please. And would everybody please give them a nice welcome?
Welcome. Yes, Senator from the 28th.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President, colleague. Today I have on the floor my legislative assistant, Dania Henry. Dania, please stand. She has worked with me this session. She's a Georgetown University law graduate, licensed attorney in DC, and she's also working on an advanced degree at Georgetown Law after being a licensed attorney. And let me read it. Attended Georgetown Law, graduate with a JD with several honors award in 2021, passed the bar in practice as an attorney in 2021, and is now completing a one-year National and Global Health Law, LLM, subject matter expert degree at Georgetown Law to graduate this spring. She was given a Global Health and Governance Fellow Scholarship award at Georgetown Law for her degree. I'm a lucky guy to have this talent on my team. So, Senators, thank you for welcoming Dania Henry.
Excellent. Welcome. Recognizing the Senator from Montgomery County, Vice Chair of Education, Energy, and the Environment.
Mr. President, thank you. You guys, NCSL, the National Conference of State Legislatures, is one of our fabulous secret weapons for legislators. They are nonpartisan and experts in any issue we are working on. And if they don't know the answer, they will get it for us. The summit that happens each year, this coming August, it'll be in Boston. I hope that a bunch of colleagues are going to go. We always learn so much, connect with legislators from both parties from around the country. And today we have Molly Ramsdell, the head of the DC office, and Ben Nasta, who does legislative work based in DC. Thank you for all you do. It's great to have you here.
Welcome. It is such a pleasure to have you all, and been welcome to the team. And Molly, so great to see you. We are so fortunate to have you all helping us and learn from these uncertain times, but learn from our other states. So federalism is a beautiful thing. So, yes, Chair of Education, Energy, and the
Could I just add that Ben actually staffs the task force, the National Conference of State Legislative Task Force on Energy Policy.
Yes.
For NCSL, so that I chair. So I just want to give him a special shout out.
Our national chair. I was saying
Correct,
our
national chair, but here's my staffer right here. Okay,
Excellent.
thank you.
Very good. Yes, big deal. It's a really big deal. Yes, recognize the Vice Chair?
All right. We got a lot of us who are key in NCSL. I'm the National Vice Chair of Elections and Redistricting, and I have, of course, yes. And again, any issue, you guys, be in touch.
Absolutely.
With them.
No, we're super fortunate to have such great national leadership within NCSL and have great teams. We're very fortunate for our engagement. So thank you. All right. Any further introductions? Any additional introductions? If not, let's go ahead and start the work. So we consider the reading of the journal from the prior legislative day. We do have a message from the executive. Do we have this up on the? Okay. Clerk will read the message.
Dear President Ferguson, in accordance with Article 2, Section 13 of the Constitution of Maryland, I am pleased to submit the following appointment nomination for confirmation by the Maryland State Senate. This individual brings exceptional knowledge and ability to the offices for which they have been nominated. I'm confident they will provide the strength of experience and leadership to instill confidence among all our citizens.
Majority Leader moves so we consider the reading of the message. This is an appointment, one additional appointment here. Message having been journalized, we will refer the name to the Executive Nominations Committee. All right, let's go ahead. We have a message from the House of Delegates. This is number 13. Clerk will read the bills.
House Bill 75, Chair, Ways and Means Committee, Election Law, Special Elections, Education, Energy, and the Environment.
Majority Leader moves to be considered the reading of the bills. They'll be referred to their appropriate standing committees. Senators, all right, just calendar and timing today, just so that folks are ready. We're going to try and do as much as we can today, but we probably will have to break somewhere around noon-ish. We've got a lot going on this afternoon, and so we'll have a number of hearings, and we're going to try and come back this evening. We'll see. It's gonna depend on budget and tax calendar. We're gonna aim for 6:30, but we'll have to kind of keep an eye on how the hearings are going in B&T to see how long those are going. So it's gonna be a late night. So eat a big lunch. Make sure to get some dinner. It's gonna be a late evening tonight. So just keep that in mind. We got a long day. So. Let's go ahead and get into it with layover calendar number 5. Clerk will read the bill.
Senate Bill 357, Senator Guile, Prescription Drug Affordability Board, Authority for Upper Payment Limits, Lowering Prescription Drug Costs for All Mail-Unders Now Act. Question is in the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable report.
All right, question before the body is on the 2 committee amendments. Any discussion of the 2 committee amendments, on the committee amendments? Any objections to the committee amendments? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion of the report? Recognize the senator from the 42nd District.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have an amendment.
Let's take up the report quickly first.
Okay, fine.
On the amended report, is there any discussion, any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. We'll recognize the senator from the 42nd District who has an amendment. Pages will collect and distribute the senator's amendment. Give us just a moment to get it up on the board, and we will take it up. All right, Senator may explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. The board, I've got a copy here of the board's attendance records over the last 4 years, and they're not strong. They started out at 81% in the early days, but now it's as low as 54% of the members attending. So all this amendment does is provides 2 things. Number 1, provides that a member of the stakeholder council is required to attend each meeting unless he provides notice or she provides notice to the co-chairs that the member is unable to attend. And then if a member misses 2 meetings without providing notice to the co-chairs, then the member shall be removed and replaced. That's all it says.
All right, Senator moves the amendment. Let's hear from the floor leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I thank the senator for this amendment. Just to clarify, I think what he's seeking by this amendment is it's not the board itself. I mean, there's a Prescription Drug Affordability Board, and then there's the Stakeholder Advisory Council. And I think the purpose of the amendment is to just understand the sponsor's intent is more about attendance of the Stakeholder Advisory Council. Is that correct?
Yes, that's
okay.
right.
In speaking with the Prescription Drug Affordability Board, I think that the information that they have is they don't have information currently on the attendance. That being said, I don't think that we need to be so prescriptive within this bill in order to outline how the procedure should be for any attendance requirements. I don't think that's required for other boards or councils of this nature, so I would just ask the body to resist this amendment.
In response, Mr. President.
All right, Senator, just see if are there any senators who wish to speak who have not yet spoken. Yes, recognize the minority leader on the amendment.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and just in support of the amendment. Obviously, as the floor leader mentioned, there's 2 very distinct boards. There's the board, PDAB board itself, and then there was also the Stakeholder Council, which does have a number of individuals from all different industries that discuss and recommend actions to the board. And through the website, we have seen, and through comments, that the participation at the Stakeholder Council has been very minimal. And what we are trying to do with respect to this amendment and this very important board that's going on, that's going to, potentially dictate drug prices and availability in the state of Maryland with access.
Senator, if we could just 1 moment. It's getting a little loud. If we could please keep our discussions focused on the senator speaking.
Thank you, Mr. President. And, again, so with this amendment, we're just trying to make sure that those that are been appointed to the Stakeholder Council are doing the job that we've asked them to do. And we found out that there are many of them that are not attending, or they're coming very late. And we've also seen that we probably have to take a look at the council altogether. There have been a number of people that have been appointed for certain reasons. So, for instance, as we have that Stakeholder Council, and somebody might be from the carrier industry, somebody might be from the industry. There's a lot of them that have also changed jobs in the last few years since this has been done. So somebody that might be, that came in from the carriers might be working for another entity now. So there's just a lot that has to go on. There's also been a number of comments that have come back as far as the participation and actually the Stakeholder Council and the members being able to talk and address the board. And we're hearing comments of limited to 90 seconds of questioning, and the board feels that they don't have to respond to questions, but they're there just to absorb this information. So, again, as PDAB continues to move forward, again, it's a very questionable policy to begin with on whether or not this is going to help drive down the cost of prescription drugs. I think the amendment that we have here is really just to make sure that those that are involved, individuals that we have asked to be involved in the council are able to be there and participate, and to make sure that we're getting the appropriate information for the board to make their decisions.
All right, thank you, Senator. Are there any other senators who wish to speak who have not yet spoken? If not, we'll hear from the maker of the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to conclude by giving the body some relevant data. In the last year, the board has only held, the Stakeholder Council has only held 5 meetings. In last April's meeting, 69% of the members attended. That's over 30% non-attendance. In June, only 54% attended. That's nearly half of the members not attending. Then in August, 69%, again, over 30% not there. And in November, 62% didn't attended, which means nearly 40% of the members didn't attend. So the attendance is poor. And because this council is so important, and since the board is so important for the people of Maryland, I think it's important that the people who are appointed to the Stakeholder Council be present and attend the meetings. And if they can't attend, that's fine, but they should be replaced with someone who can.
All right, thank you, Senator. I think we know the issue on the amendment. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. No. Noes have it. The amendment fails. Are there further amendments to the bill or its title? Yes, recognize the senator from the 42nd District. Senator has an amendment.
I do. Where is it?
The pages will collect and distribute the senator's amendment. All right, the senator may explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is a very briefly explainable amendment. It changes the purpose of the board. The real purpose of the board is primarily to benefit state residents through the drugs that they buy. But currently, the language in the statute says the purpose of the board includes to protect state and local governments and commercial health plans. I want to take that language out so that the real purpose of the board is clear from the language in the statute. The purpose of the board should be to protect state residents. That's the primary purpose of the board. So with that, I recommend the amendment. Thank you.
All right, Senator moves the amendment. Let's hear from the floor leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Again, while I appreciate the good senator's amendment, a proposed amendment, I would also ask the body to resist this amendment. The language that he asked to remove, state and local governments, commercial health plans, these are also a critical part of the function of the Prescription Drug Affordability Board. As we look to protect Marylanders from rising prescription drug costs, we also are looking to protect the bottom line of our county, our state government plans, as well as our commercial plans. This is how their pocketbooks are affected. By looking at setting upper payment limits on prescription drug costs, we also help by lowering premiums for Maryland residents. We also help lower our tax responsibility is too. So I do think that that's important to keep within the purpose of the Prescription Drug Affordability Board. I also think it's important to keep within the purpose other stakeholders within the healthcare system. It's also part of their purpose to look at the whole ecosystem as well. So I would ask the body to resist this amendment.
All right, on the amendment, are there any senators who have not yet spoken who wish to speak? If not, the maker of the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wish to request a roll call on this.
All right, on the amendment, any further discussion? If not, clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President,
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote, explain their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. With 30 votes in the negative, the senator's amendment fails. Now it's in my head. I can't, everything I'm saying. My daughter is running, how do I say it? Yeah, anyway, sorry. All right, yes, recognizing the minority whip.
Thank you, Mr. President. You could just say the amendment passes every once in a while if you want in a friendly tone of voice. No, it's fine. It's nice to see you this morning, Mr. President. I actually do have an amendment that I'd like to offer. And just to set the stage briefly, we did a lot of work on this bill in the committee, and very collaborative conversation in a lot of ways. There's some ideological concerns some of us have about the whole concept of PDAB, but that's not really the debate here today on this bill or this amendment that I'm going to talk about. One of the things that's so important, I think we all agree, and it's the goal behind PDAB is supposed to be saving patients cost on drugs. We just had a little discussion about that with the prior amendment. It seems like sometimes that gets a little far afield. But one of the other things that's very important is we want to be sure that patients have access to life-saving drugs no matter what their situation. And there are a number of groups of patient advocacy organizations that are concerned that artificially non-market-based limiting of drug prices could lead to certain sorts of drugs not being as available. And it's not just a sort of a conceptual nightmare. Colorado has seen a number of problems with availability of some of these drugs as they've moved further with PDAB than we have. And so I have an amendment at the desk. We tried to address this a little bit in the bill. There's sort of study language in the bill about factoring in the impact on rare diseases and things like blood plasma and orphan drugs. But I think we can make the bill much stronger on behalf of the patient communities with the amendment that I have. And what it would simply do is say that the bill does not apply to a drug product that is designated as a drug for a rare disease or condition under U.S. FDA statute, or a licensed biological product that is derived from human whole blood or plasma as indicated on product labeling, again approved by the U.S. FDA. And of course, blood plasma is an industry in Maryland it's a big part of our where we see ourselves going, as the governor's talked about wanting to be a destination for life sciences. So this is Maryland is a big part of this industry. So my amendment would just say let's not have PDAB set upper limits on this narrow category of rare diseases. And I just want to say this amendment is supported by a number of groups. These are life-saving drugs for over 7,000 known rare or orphan diseases. And among these diseases there's a number of them you may have never heard of, but there's also things like cystic fibrosis, hemophilia, sickle cell, muscular dystrophy, Huntington's disease. And most of the childhood cancers that we see are rare diseases. It's a rare disease because while it afflicts very badly some folks, it does not spread broadly enough to where there's sort of a common solution. And oftentimes these diseases, they will identify a drug to help at one stage, but as the young, especially for children, as they get older or as the disease alters and changes, they have to always be looking for new formulary, new mixes. And so it's very hard for a drug company. They often can find a drug with the same level of research and development as other drugs as far as how much it costs them on average. I think the average was, I don't have the number in front of me. I think it was I had an amount of money and now I can't find it, but it's about the same as it would cost them to identify a drug for other treatments, but it's a much smaller pool of people to then sell the drug to, so it's much harder to recoup costs. And so there's support for this from the National Bleeding Disorders Foundation, the Rare and Ready Coalition, which is a consortium of 70 nonprofit organizations that fight for drug and healthcare breakthroughs for rare diseases, and a number of other groups. And they just asked that this be included just to make it very clear that we don't want rare disease drugs being artificially limited in price because it will hamper research and development and the availability of these drugs. So, Mr. President, I would move this amendment. I thank the committee for, I think, our work. We did a lot of work on this issue, but this would really lock it in and make sure that we're taking care of this very important, vulnerable community.
All right. Thank you, Senator. Senators move the amendment. Let's hear from the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to thank my colleague on the Finance Committee. We had a discussion regarding this particular issue. We also discussed this issue in committee. There's no question that we sympathize with individuals with rare diseases. However, it's important to clarify the mission of the Prescription Drug Affordability Board. It is to increase access to affordable medications. And while research and development of drugs for rare diseases, commonly known as orphan drugs, heavily depend on federal funding due to their lack of profitability and high costs, the orphan drug designation has also become a tool that pharmaceutical companies use to maximize profits. In fact, pharmaceutical companies actively seek orphan drug designation because it allows them to charge significantly higher prices. To be truly effective, a PDAB must have the authority to review and establish upper payment limits on drugs, including those with orphan drug status. And while orphan drugs are intended to treat rare conditions, and those affecting fewer than 200,000 patients, financial incentives associated with this designation have led to drug manufacturers to increasingly pursue orphan status for existing medications used to treat more common diseases. As a result, more than half of orphan drug spending now goes to non-orphan conditions. Notably, 7 of the top-selling drugs in the U.S. have orphan drug designation. Moreover, research has demonstrated that orphan drugs involve less investment risk and lower development costs due to substantial federal benefits and protections. I won't list them all, but it includes exemptions from 340B drug pricing, a minimum of 7 years of market exclusivity, among others. A critical concern also is that once a drug receives orphan designation, the status is not revoked, even if that treatment population grows beyond 200,000 due to additional FDA-approved indications. This, combined with extensive market protections, has resulted in orphan drugs becoming some of the most expensive medications on the market, particularly because many are biologics with no market competition. That being said, the committee did carefully consider the concerns of the rare disease community and acknowledges the needs for safeguards. Rather than fully exempting orphan drugs from PDAB review, we took a balanced approach. This includes the PDAB mandating that the PDAB is required to assess the potential impact of an upper payment limit on patients with rare diseases before setting one for an orphan designated drug. We also added a representative from the rare disease community to the PDAB Stakeholder Council. And if the PDAB sets an upper payment limit, it must include in its first report, after the UPL has been in effect for a year, an analysis of whether certain patient populations, including those with rare diseases, experienced any disproportionate access challenges. By taking these steps, we ensure that affordability measures do not unintentionally harm patients, while also preventing pharmaceutical companies from exploiting the orphan drug designation to drive up costs unchecked. So therefore, I would ask the body to resist this amendment. Thank you, Mr. President.
All right. On the amendment, are there further discussion on the amendment? Yes, recognize the minority leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, on the amendment. I think it's important as we start talking about these drugs for rare diseases and the plasma-derived therapies on what they mean to patients in Maryland and actually what this bill does in its entirety. One may look at the title of the bill, Lowering Prescription Drug Costs for All Marylanders Now Act, and may get confused that this bill is actually going to lower drug costs for patients, when essentially that's not what this bill does. That's not what the PDAB does, but the PDAB will put upper payment limits on certain drugs, and then as a result of those, if that goes into effect, the insurance carriers will see lower premiums as a result. They'll see the cost of these drugs come down, and it is hopeful that the insurance companies may pass on savings of these premiums, but that's not mandated. That's not required. So this bill doesn't really do anything with respect to patients going up to the counter at pharmacies and paying less for drugs. This is all about, again, insurance premiums and where they are. And if you look at a lot of the testimony with respect to this bill, and again, Mr. President, we are under a deficit here with respect to where we are with the state budget, and certainly cost savings for that is important. And maybe this bill can do something like that, not to the tune of $3 billion that we have to find, but the testimony for this bill says, at a time when many government budgets are stretched thin, adopting upper payment limit action plan would equip our state with the tools to bring meaningful relief. So again, it's talking specifically about the insurance programs and the formularies that states and local governments purchase from insurance carriers and the possibility that they may go down. So in tying this back to the amendment, it is important that we take into consideration the patients when we're talking about this bill. And one of the very important things that we can do with the patients is to make sure that they have access to these life-saving drugs. And by eliminating these drugs from upper payment limits, we can assure one thing for our patients, that they will not be in a position where accessibility to very important drugs has not been limited by the PDAB. And this amendment will assure that those drugs cannot have upper payment limits placed on them, that they will continue to be available to the patients. And when we talk about, again, the plasma-derived therapies, those are very important businesses in Maryland. You know, we have a number of companies in the state that specifically work on these PDTs. And they are watching what the legislature is doing as well, too. They are talking about expanding in the state of Maryland. They are talking about, you know, growing and going forward with their discovery and innovation and research. And yet Maryland is going to be one of only a few states that talks about upper payment limits and puts restrictions on the cost of drugs and, unfortunately, the availability of those drugs if the pharmaceutical companies decide not to bring these drugs back to the state. So as the governor continues to talk about life sciences and the biotech industry and wanting to promote that, be assured those companies are watching what this General Assembly does right now. Be assured that they are looking at the state of Maryland and saying, you are being very restrictive on research and development by passing this legislation. And unfortunately, this amendment would at least give us the ability to say to companies that are in Maryland, we believe in you, we believe in the research that you're doing, and we want to protect not only your investment in Maryland, but we want to protect the patients. And again, this is one of the only things that we believe within this entire bill that would make sure that the patients continue to have access to these life-saving drugs. I think it's a very important amendment. Again, it was discussed in committee. We were on the verge of potentially passing this amendment one afternoon, and all of a sudden, you know, the amendment goes away because, you know, a certain advocate for this piece of legislation decided that he didn't want the amendment on. And instead of the 47 of us...
Senator, just to reiterate, I think we should be very careful about how we impugn certain reasons. The committee voted a certain way.
The committee didn't vote, Mr. President.
The committee didn't take up the issue.
Did not take it up. And so, again, I'm giving the opportunity for the entire body to take this up, or my colleague is giving the opportunity for the entire body to take this up. But, you know, obviously certain things go on when you see something that you thought might be coming up for a vote and does not. And, you know, sometimes there are questions on why that may or may not happen. But, you know, we do know that advocates for the bill are looking at this legislation that we're passing as model legislation for the entire country. And we do know that they are trying to promote this, and once it gets past Maryland, that they'll be able to look at this in other countries, in other states, because We've seen it happen in Colorado, and it's been a failure. It has not worked in Colorado. And so they're trying to make changes here, and they didn't want to go too far. And unfortunately, I think that has to come up when we start looking at what is our responsibility. Our responsibility is not to create model legislation that other states will use. Our responsibility is the patients and the citizens of Maryland. And again, I think it's important with this amendment, we make sure that we're saying to the patients, you will continue to have access to these life-saving drugs. And with that, Mr. President, I would move the amendment.
All right. On the amendment, let's hear for the Vice Chair of Budget and Tax.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in opposition to the amendment. We're all for researching new drugs and better solutions for our people. And that's a lot of that's going on in Maryland, a lot of that's going on around the United States. But creating new drugs that are unaffordable doesn't help people's health either. And the reality is that the gentleman talks about other states might follow our lead. God forbid they should do the right thing too. The fact of the matter is that we have among the highest prices for drugs in the world, because we don't look at the affordability issues in the United States the way other countries do. That's the reason people go to Canada to buy drugs. And we know all that. The reality is that this board is a small step in the right direction. There are other steps the federal government has taken finally to negotiate with Medicare on drug prices, but we got a long way to go to make these life-saving drugs and health drugs that help people's health available to people. Inventing a drug when people can't afford to use it doesn't make any sense. We need to bring down drug prices. This will help bring down drug prices, and I therefore believe this bill is important and oppose the amendment.
All right. Thank you, Senator. And let's hear from the Minority Whip on the or maker of the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just, I guess, in closing here on this amendment, number one, this is not, I know I'm sitting over here on this side of the aisle, but this is not really a partisan issue as it relates to this amendment. We can debate back and forth the merits of the board and this approach. We also can debate, you know, it was mentioned that our prices are extremely high in America, and they are high, and there are problems with that. Although in some places in the world, a lot of places in the world where the drug price is lower, but they don't have access to these kind of drugs. So it's easy to say the price is high, but then but you're alive. We do need to figure out better ways to get the price of drugs down. But there's also a factor. It's not just the drug manufacturers. It's not just the pharmaceutical companies. I don't hold them harmless for everything that's ever happened. But we also have an extensive insurance bureaucracy. We have PBMs. There's a whole lot. There's government regulations that play into it. There's a lot of factors. What this amendment is attempting to do is just to say for these drugs for rare diseases and blood plasma, and I'm going to tell you, I didn't know much about plasma therapy really up until recently. I'd always heard about it. I started looking into it. It's really amazing. I mean, I would really encourage people, no matter what you think about this amendment, it's amazing what you can do with these plasma therapies, and it really is just almost miraculous what we can do. But it's very expensive to research, and it takes a lot of effort and time, and so it's important, I think, to be sure that they're protected from setting an artificial limit. But let me answer a couple of the assertions that were made by my good friend, the floor leader, who is a very passionate advocate for this, and we agree on a number of things. But in this case, she mentioned she quoted the specific statistic of 7 of the top 10 selling drugs in the United States are orphan drugs. Well, the fact is that the drugs that get these orphan designations, they can have multiple indications, multiple uses, both orphan and non-orphan. So a drug can be given an orphan designation, but they have a non-orphan designation for a different track of the drug. For example, Humira has 12 indications, 4 of which are orphan, but 8 are not. Humira made in 2016, and this is almost a decade ago, but in 2016, they had $13.6 billion in total sales, Humira did, but only 4% of those were orphan drugs. So you can say, well, it's a high-selling drug and it's an orphan drug. Well, they have a designation as part of it that's orphan. So sometimes the facts can be, the context is important. The total drug sales in the United States in the middle of last decade, it was about $450 billion. Only 8% were for orphan drug designation approved drugs. So I think that's important. And a little bit more recent information, the 2020 National Organization for Rare Diseases report that came out said there are 447 drugs. There's only 447 drugs that have an orphan-only indication. 104 of those were approved for 2 or more orphan indications. Approximately 343 drugs are approved only for 1 application. So yes, there are some of these so-called orphan drugs, I would like to call them rare disease drugs because that's what they're treating, rare disease drugs, that are approved for more than 1 application, true. But the vast majority of them are for just one type of very special rare disease. And again, I went through the list earlier, things from cystic fibrosis to childhood cancer to sickle cell to hemophilia. I had a good friend when I was in high school who was hemophiliac, a terrible, terrible affliction for somebody to deal with. And it changes over time, so there's constant research in it. So what we're trying to do with this amendment is just simply say, this is experimental what we're doing. We haven't seen any price savings yet from the PDAB effort. Let's just keep these out. You can always come back later and say, okay, now we found a reason why this particular type of orphan drug is being abused, and so and being overly priced, and so we do need to fix it. So I would I urge the body to support the amendment, Mr. President. I would ask for a roll call, and thank you for the attention.
All right, thank you, Senator. Let's hear from the Senator from Montgomery County.
Would the maker of the amendment yield for a question?
Will the maker of the amendment yield? Senator may
Yes,
proceed.
sir.
So I was just looking at the FDA website, and I'd like to report to everyone the FDA still exists, which is good. But I was looking at biological, and it does include vaccines.
Okay.
So you're saying that vaccines shouldn't be covered by this?
Vaccines should be covered by this.
They shouldn't be included? Because right now you'd be striking out, at least from what I'm seeing, because this is to remove
It's just to say you cannot, for a rare disease, you cannot put an artificial upper payment limit on a rare disease drug.
But it also includes, number 2, doesn't necessarily, it's separate from the rare disease, and includes any biological product derived from the human body, and that includes vaccines.
That's not my understanding of that. It could be. But again, I don't think anybody's alleged that we have a problem with the high price of vaccines. Nobody's, that's not the reason for PDAB. It's not been an issue that has, it wouldn't meet the unaffordability challenge.
Okay, just flagging it.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Let's hear for the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Really briefly, my colleague from Finance Committee from Carroll County actually made a good point when he said that certain of these products that have these rare disease designations that are top-selling drugs, including Humira, Enbrel, for example, is an orphan too, with 94% of spending for non-orphan indications. There's a financial incentive in order to get orphan drug designation, even though the majority of the indications, what these drugs are used for, are for non-orphan purposes. So I do indeed sympathize with the rare disease community. Keep in mind that there are financial incentives for getting this orphan drug designation, even though many of the indications are not for orphan drug purposes. And then, again, I would just ask the body to resist the amendment. Thank you, Mr. President.
All right, on the amendment, all in favor of the amendment, say aye. Oh, did Senator ask for apologies? The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President,
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote, explain their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. With 33 votes in the negative, the senator's amendment fails. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 357 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. All right, let's go ahead and let's get into some committees. Let's see if we can get some of these out of the way. We've got Education, Energy, and the Environment, report number 13. Clerk will read the first bill.
Senate Bill 168, Senator Simonaire, Environmental Justice and Confined Aquatic Disposal Act, favorable with 2 amendments.
Recognize the bill sponsor as floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. As amended, this consensus bill places a 4-year moratorium on the construction of confined aquatic disposal cells in the state. There are 2 amendments. The first is technical. The second strikes provision of the bill that would have restricted construction of confined aquatic disposals within 5 miles of overburdened residential community and substitutes a statewide prohibition. The amendment also alters the definition of confined aquatic disposal cell and adds a sunset provision terminating the bill on May 31st, 2029. There is no opposition. Move the amendments in the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the two committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the two committee amendments are adopted. Question now on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 168 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Before we move to the next one, I want to recognize the senator from District 1, Western Maryland. Senator from District 1.
Thank you, sir. I was babysitting. Mr. President, it's a pleasure to announce that there are some students from Frostburg State University in our gallery. Colleagues, could you give them a round of applause, please?
Welcome, Frostburg.
Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Pleasure to have you all. Hope you enjoy your day here in Annapolis. Excellent. All right, clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 249, Chair, Education, Energy, and the Environment Committee, Pesticide and Pest Control, revisions to pesticide applicators law and repeal of obsolete provisions, favorable.
Recognizing the senator from Harford County.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 249 is a departmental bill from the Department of Agriculture. It updates provisions of law governing the application of pesticides to prohibit non-certified individuals from doing commercial applications of restricted use pesticides, and also establishes additional safeguards for non-certified individuals doing private agricultural applications of restricted use pesticides that are under the direct supervision of a certified private applicator. The bill also repeals obsolete provisions of law that govern certain termiticides and anti-fouling paints. There are no committee amendments. I'd like to move for adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the favorable committee report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the favorable committee report is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 249 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 253, Chair, Education, Energy, and the Environment Committee, Controlled Hazardous Substance Facility Permit, Research Facilities, Chemical Warfare Material Requirements, favorable with two amendments.
Recognizing Chair of the Committee is the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is department. If you indulge me, I think a little history. This is, I think, an important piece of legislation. This is a departmental bill from the Department of Commerce, and I should also add an important national defense priority. You'll see testimony in the queue from the Office of the Assistant Secretary of Defense, which is not something we see very often here in Annapolis. And the reason is that the bill goes directly to our nation's ability to do research to protect our troops and our nation from some of the weapons of mass destruction technology currently being developed by some of our enemies. So just a little background, Mr. President. I mean, most of us are familiar with the fact that Aberdeen Proving Grounds has been a major U.S. defense facility since 1917, the largest employer in Harford County. But what you may not know is that it was designated under the Chemical Weapons Convention as the only place in the nation where chemical agents can be synthesized and stored at quantities needed for some very specific defense research. And development and testing of new thermal technologies that can be used to destroy chemical and biological agents. Currently, there are 4 new thermal destruction technologies at risk of delay because of laws put in place way back in the early 90s that largely have no practical applicability to the current development and testing of these new technologies. So Senate Bill 253, as drafted, exempted the incineration of chemical warfare materials at a U.S. Department of Defense designated research facility from certain special permitting requirements if the incineration is done for research, development, or demonstration purposes. The bottom line, Mr. President, is that the current statute would prevent the U.S. from being able to develop these technologies capable of destroying the weapons I referenced earlier. There was some opposition to the bill as drafted, but I'm pleased to report that with the amendments the committee put on the bill, the concerns raised have been addressed, and I don't believe there's any longer any opposition to the bill. So the committee worked with the Department of Commerce, MDE, Defense Department, the Maryland Military Coalition opponents to address the concerns raised. Amendment number 1 is technical. Amendment number 2 clarifies that the activities covered by the bill would need to be permitted under a special controlled hazardous substance research, development, and demonstration permit issued by the Maryland Department of the Environment. The amendment also establishes special air monitoring requirements, permitting considerations, and reporting requirements applicable to the activities covered under the bill, which would apply which would apply above and beyond which is already required for these permits. And with all these amendments, Mr. President, the bill did pass unanimously, 11-0 out of the EEE committee. So with that background, I move the adoption of the favorable committee report and the 3 committee amendments, Mr. President.
All right, the floor leader moves for the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. I think
Or
Aberdeen
2
is-
committee amendments.
2 committee amendments, apologize. I think Aberdeen is still the 50% of all Army research and development flows through Aberdeen.
Yes.
Pretty remarkable, pretty remarkable. All right, on the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 253 is hereby ordered printed for 3rd reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 282, Senator Simon Nair, Recreational Equality for Service Members Act, favorable with 1 amendment.
Recognize the bill sponsor as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. This bill generally establishes uniform definitions related to the military in the general provisions, natural resources, and state government articles in the Maryland Code, primarily by reference to definitions to U.S. Code. The bill also clarifies and expands availability of certain recreational privileges to certain additional service members and veterans. There is 1 committee amendment. The amendment conforms the definition used to the bill in Senate Bill 275 as unanimously passed by the Senate and explicitly adds member of the Maryland National Guard to provisions authorizing certain active service members to access state park facilities without paying a fee. There was no opposition, no fiscal impact. I move the amendments in the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the 1 committee amendment and the favorable committee report. On the amendment, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 1 committee amendment is adopted. Question now on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill? Oh, yes, recognizing the bill sponsor as an amendment.
Yes, just a little amendment.
Pages will collect and distribute the senator's amendment. I have a suspicion I know what this one may be. Potentially. And I was correct. Senator may explain the amendment.
Yeah, I just missed this in committee. There was a sponsor amendment.
Excellent. All right, Senator moves the sponsor amendment. Any objections? Without objection. So ordered. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 282 is hereby ordered printed for 3rd reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 399, Senator McKay, Natural Resources, Wildland Areas, Overhead Transmission Lines, favorable with 3 amendments.
Recognizing the chair of the committee.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is another one, if you will indulge me, a little background I think is important. Senate Bill 399 relates to a Western Maryland transmission project running through sections of Allegheny and Garrett, needed to help provide much-needed reliable electric power to that part of the state for decades to come and generate hundreds of millions of dollars in taxes and benefits to the state over the next several decades. And also help the broader PJM electric grid. The project is still in the initial stages of study development. No alignment has been selected, and I want to emphasize this has nothing whatsoever to do with that Piedmont Reliability Project elsewhere in the state currently being reviewed by the Public Service Commission, which has been the topic of a lot of attention. Nothing to do with that. One of the potential routes being considered that arguably is the most effective and least impact on multiple fronts to that region of the state is adjacent and parallel to an existing Potomac Edison transmission line, which traverses some designated wildlands. So what Senate Bill 399 does, it exempts, subject to specified conditions, a small portion of that land from continue to be designated as a wildland if, number 1, the line runs parallel to the existing Potomac Edison transmission line, and 2, a certificate of public convenience and necessity is ultimately obtained from the PSC for that route. The bill does not approve the alignment transmission line on that route, does not put any thumb on the scale for the PSC. It's not to be construed as any time of a recommendation that the project be approved and issued a CPCN. I would note, Mr. President, DNR, which oversees and responsible for administering our state wildland preservation system, is not opposed to the bill. The Maryland Farm Bureau supports the bill. We did put on some important amendments. And amendment number 1 is technical. Amendment number 2 requires an applicant for a CPCN to construct a transmission line through the wildlands specified in the bill to provide certain wildlife mitigation guarantees to the PSC, including working with DNR to add additional wildland acreage to make up for what is lost. Amendment number 3 adds a sunset provision which would terminate the bill in the event the PSC ultimately denies the CPCN for this transmission line or approves a route for the transmission line that does not cross the state wildlands. Mr. President, let me close by saying that with those amendments and the fact that there was no opposition from the Department of Natural Resources, the bill did pass 9-0 out of the EEE committee. So with that, I would move the favorable committee report and the 3 committee amendments.
All right, the floor leader moves for the adoption of the 3 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, 3 committee amendments are adopted. Question now on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 399 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 580, Washington County Senators, Washington County Public Safety Buildings Used for Agritourism, favorable. 2 amendments.
Recognize the senator from the 35th District as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 580 is a local bill that adds Washington County to the list of jurisdictions where an existing building used for agritourism is exempt from obtaining a change of occupancy permit if the building's use of agritourism does not require it to be occupied by more than 200 people at any one time, and the total width of egress for the building meets specified building code standards. There are 2 committee amendments. The first one's technical. Second amendment corrects scope language in the section of code amended by the bill to include Washington County in the list of covered jurisdictions. I'd like to move the 2 amendments and ask for adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 580 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 775, Senator Kagan, work group to study implementation of a statewide 311 non-emergency telephone system, favorable. 2 amendments.
Recognizing the bill sponsor as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, last year we passed a bill encouraging progress on a statewide 311 bill. It will both provide great customer service and lighten the load on our 911 centers, which often get non-emergency calls. So questions about where can I get a flu shot or where can I register to vote are easy, and yet people don't know where else to turn. So the Department of Information Technology hired a really great consulting firm that spent the interim gathering information and writing a report. This bill simply allows us to take the next step, get all the smart people in the room, and see if we can move forward with a 311 system. Right now, it's in 6 counties, and we want it to be more widely available. So the committee has 2 amendments. The first is technical, and the second removes the word statewide, because in this fiscal time we are not going statewide, and takes out the word telephone, because it's also going to be text and an app and all that. So I'd like to first move the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report.
All right, the floor leader moves for the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 2 amendments are adopted. Question on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Senator has an additional amendment that the pages are collecting and will distribute. Senator, give us just a moment to load it up. All right, Senator may explain the amendment.
Thank you. This is just who's going to do the work and who's going to be able to hire the consultant. Rather than MDEM, the Department of Emergency Management, it makes more sense for DO-IT, the Department of Information Technology, to continue their work, and the Department of Legislative Services very generously offered to provide some of the support in that, and that's what the amendment does. Move the amendment.
All right, Senator moves the amendment. Any discussion on the amendment? Any objections? Without objection, the amendment is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 775 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. I think we have one more on this calendar, is that right? Yep, clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 964, Dorchester County Senators, Dorchester County Well and On-Site Sewage Disposal Activities Privatization Program, favorable. 1 amendment.
Recognizing the senator from the 38th District as the floor leader.
Good morning, Mr. President and colleagues. Senate Bill 964 is a local bill, Dorchester County. It would authorize the Maryland Department of the Environment at the request of Dorchester County government and the delegated approval authority, to establish a privatization program for the performance of certain activities relating to wells and septic systems in Dorchester County. The bill also establishes related duties for the Maryland Department of the Environment and authorizes MDE to suspend or halt the privatization program under certain circumstances. This bill takes effect July 1st of 2025 and terminates June 30th of 2028. There is one committee amendment, and this amendment clarifies and strengthens the Maryland Department of Environment's oversight of any privatization program that moves forward under the bill. So I would move for a favorable amendment to SB 964, favorable report on Senate Bill 964 as amended.
All right, the floor leader moves for the adoption of the one committee amendment, recognizing the senator from Baltimore County on the amendment.
Thank you very much. Just for clarification, if I might ask.
Will the floor leader yield?
Sure.
Senator may proceed.
Thank you very much. What is a privatization program?
This would allow the Maryland Department of the Environment to pilot on a pilot basis to work with a private company on the septic and water well program. That's why we put the additional safeguards in. It would only be at the request of both the Dorchester County government and, in this case, the delegated approval authority is the Dorchester County Health Department.
Thank you very much.
All right. On the amendment, any further discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the one committee amendment is adopted. Question on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 964 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. All right, let's stick with education, energy, and the environment. This is 14. Clerk will read the first bill.
Senate Bill 57, Senator Simon Nair, funeral establishments, crematories, reduction of facilities, disposition of unclaimed remains, veterans, favorable.
Recognize the bill sponsor as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. This bill establishes requirements in the business regulation that conform those already in place in the health occupation article. The bill requires, under the business regulation article, a licensed funeral establishment, crematory operator, or reduction facility to take specific actions if a veteran service organization does not take possession of unclaimed cremains or other remains, or a portion of the unclaimed soil remains of a qualified lot for a state veteran cemetery. The bill also makes further conforming changes to the health occupation article with regard to unclaimed hydrolyzed remains of veterans. There are no amendments, no opposition, and no fiscal impact. I move the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the favorable committee report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the favorable committee report is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 57 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 114, Senator Simon Nair, Maryland Department of Labor, licenses, notation of veteran status, and eligibility for benefits, favorable with two amendments.
Recognize the bill sponsor as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. This bill authorizes each unit in the Maryland Department of Labor to establish a process to include a notation including veteran status on the occupational license. The bill establishes additional specifications for any process implemented under a unit by the Maryland Labor Department. There are two amendments. The first is technical. The second strikes provisions of the bill that relate to assisting a veteran in determining the eligibility of benefits. Finance was secondary on the bill and voted favorably with these amendments as described above. There is no opposition, no fiscal impact. I move the amendments in the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the two committee amendments in the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the two committee amendments are adopted. Question now on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 114 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 263, Chair, Education, Energy, and the Environment Committee, heating, ventilation, air conditioning, and refrigeration, contractors, license restoration, favorable.
Recognizing the senator from the 23rd District as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Colleagues, this departmental bill extends the time period during which a licensee of the State Board of Heating, Ventilation, Air Conditioning, and Refrigeration contractors may apply for a license restoration after expiration. There are no amendments. There's no fiscal impact. I move for the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the favorable committee report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the favorable committee report is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 263 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 294, Senator Feldman, Maryland Cybersecurity Council membership alterations, favorable with 2 amendments.
Recognize the senator from District 9 as the floor leader.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, 10 years ago, we established the Maryland Cybersecurity Council, which has really enhanced our regulations for the state and kept us, as safe as possible in the past 10 years. This bill was put forward by the Attorney General, and as introduced, the bill basically said that instead of the Attorney General chairing the commission, it would be elected by the council members. There are 2 committee amendments. The first one is technical and adds co-sponsors, and the second amendment adds several additional members to the council, requires that either the chair or the vice chair of the council be a state employee, and also adds privacy interests and AI threats to the charge of the council. There is no fiscal note. It passed committee unanimously. I urge the adoption of the committee amendments and the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 294 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 354, Senator Salling, Maryland Inventory of Cemeteries and Burial Sites Work Group establishment, favorable with 2 amendments.
Recognize the vice chair of the committee as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, cemeteries hold our families, our friends, our heroes and sheroes, our loved ones, and our history. And yet they are too often hidden and not well cared for. So this work group is going to help create a database, have all the smart folks in the room, and make sure that we've got the information and then decide whether there are next steps. There are 2 committee amendments. The first is technical, and the second removes the Office of Cemetery Oversight from the staffing provisions of the bill. Move favorable on the 2 committee amendments and the adoption of the bill.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 354 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 436, Senator Waldstreicher, Maryland Department of Labor, study on building code requirements for single staircase buildings, favorable 1 amendment.
Recognizing the senator from Prince George's as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. We are in the midst of a housing crisis. And one of the challenges that we have with this housing crisis is the cost to build housing, particularly housing that is taller, multifamily housing. And there have been other places in the world where they have been able to reduce some of those costs by changing some of the safety aspects. One of those safety aspects that we know we want to make sure our buildings are safe for everyone, but one of the things that you want to be able to look at is the number of staircases that are in these buildings. And so under current Maryland law, because of the height of fire ladders and stuff like that, we want to ensure when you're above up to 6 floors that you would have 2 staircases. And this is something that is worthwhile to study to make sure that if we can look at whether or not it's safe to have a single staircase in those circumstances. And that's what this bill is. It's a study bill to look at those building code requirements for the single staircase buildings in the state, and also to look at other states and how they've done it, and then make recommendations for potential legislation or regulatory changes to authorize the construction of single staircase buildings up to 6 stories above grade plane in the state for the purpose of increasing our affordable housing supply. We have a committee amendment that adds the state fire marshal and 4 firefighter associations to the study. I move adoption of the committee amendments and the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the 1 committee amendment and the favorable committee report. I think Colorado is also Governor Polis just did a big thing on this one too. All right. Yes, on the amendment, recognize the minority whip.
I wonder if I could ask the floor leader a question.
Will floor leader yield?
Of course.
Senator
Thank
may
you.
proceed.
The Senate President just mentioned perhaps my favorite Democratic governor, Governor Polis. He also is a believer in some of the tax policies that some of us really think are a good idea, but that's a separate issue.
Is that on the bill, Senator?
Yeah, good ideas. We're on the subject of good ideas.
Okay.
My understanding is this is an attempt to try to find ways to reduce housing costs, correct? I mean, is that the main goal here? Obviously, we want to stay safe, but that's the
Yes.
main goal.
Yes.
Okay, that's what I thought. It's not a. There was some chatter about this recently from some people, and I think they were misunderstanding what the goal was. The goal is to make sure we find ways to just sensibly reduce costs for dense housing, particularly apartment housing. There's a fiscal note on this? Did the fiscal note get addressed? It's not a large. I think it's a six-figure one, but it says 2 contractual positions.
I am not certain that that this fiscal note, which is
okay.
No, yes, it does have a fiscal note, as you mentioned. It's in 26 though, and so I think we probably have a May language in there. So even if it's in 26, then
We can address it then on the funding side.
Mhm.
Okay, yeah. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. President.
Sure.
All right. On the amendment, any further discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the one committee amendment is adopted. Question now on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 436 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 529, Senator Brooks, Business Occupations and Professions, Professional Engineers Examination, favorable.
Recognizing the bill sponsor is the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This bill requires an applicant for licensure as a professional engineer under the work experience only option to take and pass the fundamental of engineering exam prior to taking the principle and practices of engineering exam. There were no amendments, and I move the bill, the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the favorable committee report. On the report, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the favorable report is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 529 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 617, Senator Guile, State Board of Cosmetologists Licensing Eyelash Extensions, favorable.
Recognize the senator from Baltimore City and County is the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. So one of our authorities is looking at the, in our committee, is the cosmetology board. And Mr. President, I was thinking about when I was a kid, cosmetology or the beauty salon was in the basement of Mr. Waddell's house. You know, we would go there, and I'm he may have had a license, he may not have had a license, but, you know, over the years, we've come to understand that, you know, the practices have grown and grown, and there's increasing want to make sure that people are safe and that practices are being adhered to. So in the area of aesthetics, which is beauty, things to, I guess, make us all more aesthetically pleasing, there are various operations to adjust the hair on one's face and one's eyelashes. And some are invasive, some are tattoos, and some are not. Some are just attaching. So this license, because of sort of the increasing the requirements for people who provide hair services and nail services, it has come to our attention that people who are currently applying extensions for your eyelashes are doing so illegally, right? Or let's say unauthorized. And so what this bill does is provide for a limited license to provide eyelash extensions. And again, it joins nail technicians, hair services, and others. There are no committee amendments, and it passed our committee unanimously. I ask for for adoption of the favorable report.
All right, floor leader moves to the adoption of the favorable committee report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the favorable committee report is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 617 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 680, Senator Carrozza, Real Estate Commission, continuing education requirements, alterations, favorable with one amendment.
Recognize the senator from the 38th District as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 680 has to do with continuing education requirements for realtors, and realtors provide us with valuable services, assisting our families with their most important purchase, their home, and also small business operators. So it's important that we keep the continuing education requirements updated. So this bill alters several continuing education requirements for the renewal of a license for real estate brokers, associate real estate brokers, and real estate salespersons. Specifically, the bill alters clock hour requirements, course topics, course instructor selection, and course application fees. There is one amendment that clarifies that notwithstanding any other provision of the law, the continuing education courses shall be taught by a qualified instructor with real estate practice experience. There is no fiscal impact. There was no opposition. I move Senate Bill 680 as amended. Favorable report.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the one committee amendment and the favorable committee report. On the amendment, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the one committee amendment is adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 680 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Before we go to the next one, recognize the senator from the 45th District.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, today we're joined by Moravia Park Elementary. They're in the gallery at this moment. What I'm excited about is that they're joined by their teacher, Mr. President, Miss Lampert, who's brought them to make sure that they're exposed, that they have access to be able to see how their government works. And just a proud moment. When I think about paying it forward, and I think about this every day, Mr. President, there's a woman that works here that used to teach at Moravia Park Elementary that makes sure that they have that access, and her name is Megan Ford. So I just want to salute Ms. Lampert, I want to salute Megan Ford, but more importantly, if we can give a round of applause to Moravia Park Elementary, y'all.
Welcome, Moravia. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We're so pleased to have you all. Hope you enjoy your day down here. All right, let's see. Let's go to judicial proceedings. We've got calendar 18. Clerk will read the first bill.
Senate Bill 46, Senator Watson, criminal law, fraud, possession of residential real property, favorable two amendments.
Recognize the senator from the 25th District as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. This bill prohibits a person from possessing or claiming a right to possess residential real property that the person does not lawfully possess or own with the intent to defraud another. It also establishes procedures under which a sheriff's office must remove a person who is allegedly in violation of the bill's provision and return possession of the property to the owner. The bill preserves the owner's right to file a wrongful detainer action under Section 14132 of the Real Property Article. Mr. President, there were two amendments. Amendment number 1 is technical. Amendment number 2 strikes the bill and substitutes an expedited wrongful detainer process. Specifically, the amendment establishes that a summons does not need to contain the defendant's name, authorizes posting of process on the property for all instances of service, and reduces the time period within which a wrongful detainer hearing and an appeal must be held, and requires a sheriff or constable to immediately execute a warrant by the court. I ask that we move the amendments.
All right, the floor leader moves to the adoption of the two committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Recognize the senator from the capital city on the amendments.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you to the floor leader for the explanation of the bill and the amendments. I just want to make sure that I'm understanding what a wrongful detainer action is. So there are 4 ways that you could do an eviction in Maryland. You have your summary ejectment if a person fails to pay their rent. You have your breach of lease if they materially breach a term of their lease. You also have a holdover if there's an expired lease and the tenant refuses to leave. And then the catch-all is the wrongful detainer. Am I understanding that right?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Under the wrongful detainer, the scenario you presented when presenting the bill was a squatter that's in a house that they have no right to be in. But there's a number of scenarios. If I could give you a fact pattern, you have a person who, and this is a real scenario that happened, who moved to the state of Maryland because they fell in love with someone. The person that they moved in with, they had a lease for the property from their friend. They leased the house. But the person who moved here, the girlfriend, was not on the lease. So when the boyfriend decided to terminate the lease and move out of the property, the girlfriend was still there. She didn't have an obligation to pay rent, so you couldn't use summary ejectment. She also didn't have a lease that she breached, so there was no breach of lease. She also wasn't there after an expired lease, so there was no holdover. So wrongful detainer was the only action. Would you agree that there are circumstances that are not just the squatter that we've seen on TikTok videos and other places, but you could have someone who earnestly came to live in a place and then finds themselves facing a wrongful detainer action?
Yes, ma'am, and that's been a major point of contention and part of the conversation as we've been dealing with this bill, how to protect folks on all sides of dealing with this particular issue. So yes, you're correct.
One of the provisions of the bill in the amendments, it changes the timeline for our sheriff to immediately. It says that the sheriff could immediately remove that person from the property if you get an order. Isn't that dissimilar to how we do our other 3 actions for eviction?
Maybe. Maybe.
Okay, so let me just say a little context. If a person is evicted because they failed to pay their rent, they have 10 days after the hearing to file for an appeal, and during that appeal window, the sheriff could not evict the person. You can't even get your warrant of restitution signed until after that appeal period expires. Is that correct?
Yes.
And there are similar proceedings if it's breach of lease or if it's tenant holdover. Is that correct?
Yes.
But what we want to do with wrongful detainer is we want to take away the value of that appeal period. We've already reduced it from 10 days to 4 days in the amendment, and now we want to allow the sheriff to immediately remove somebody before they even have exercised their appellate rights?
And that's where I think we differ a little bit on the issue when it comes to immediately. When folks are dealing with somebody taking their property illegally, which is the wrongful detainer process kicks in. When somebody takes your property, you want to be able to get back into your property. Anyone on this floor, if they could imagine someone coming in and squatting on your property, you go to court, and then the judge makes a ruling, and when the judge makes a ruling, they tell you you now have access to your property, but you now have to wait 4 days. Hence why we added immediately within the bill. The person still has 4 days to go back to the courts to appeal, but we give them immediate access to their property.
So when you say we give them immediate access, what you're saying is that unlike in any of the other cases, the landlord can walk out of that courtroom with their order in hand, summon the sheriff, and remove that person on that same day before the person has even exercised their appeal rights. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
All right. On the committee amendments, recognize the sponsor of the bill.
Yes, Mr. President, may I ask the floor leader a question?
The floor to yield. Senator may proceed.
Would you agree that there is difference between theft, which a squatter is doing, and someone who is late paying a rent, that there's an action?
There's a huge difference.
Thank you.
All right. On the amendments, any further discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amendments are adopted. Question. Senator has an amendment.
I have another amendment.
On the report. Before we get to the amendment, question on the amended report. Any objections to the amended report? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. The floor leader has an amendment. The pages will collect and distribute the senator's amendment. If we could just give us 1 second to get the amendment distributed. Senator may explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. This amendment strikes Senator Watson and adds all the rest of the sponsors to add on with Senator Watson.
All right. Any objections to the amendment? Without objection, the amendment is adopted. Recognize the senator from the 22nd District.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yes, I was wondering if we can special order this bill to the end of the calendar for purposes of amendment.
Any objections to the special order?
No objections. He and I already talked.
Just to clarify, could we do end of the day? Is the amendment request in already? Okay, we'll do the end of the day, see if we can get it in time. All right, any objections? Without objection, so ordered. We'll try to get it before we break today. Recognize the senator from the 43rd.
Could the floor leader yield for a
Senator,
question?
we're going to hold on to it for now because we special ordered it to the end of the day for the amendment. So
For questions, okay.
we'll take it up then.
Okay.
All right, clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 63, Senator Muse, Cooperative Housing, Corporations, Condominiums, and Homeowners Association, funding of reserve accounts and preparation of funding plans, favorable with 9 amendments.
Recognizing the bill sponsors, the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, this bill makes various changes related to the requirements for cooperative housing, corporations, condominiums, and homeowner associations, collectively known as common ownership communities, to fund reserve accounts. Among other provisions, the bill, 1, requires the governing body to prepare a specified funding plan. 2, extends from 3 years to 5 years the amount of time after an initial reserve study that such entitles have to attain the annual reserve funding level as recommended to the body. They are non-committee amendments. Amendment number 1 is technical. Amendments numbers 2 to 9 authorize the governing body to make a financial hardship determination to reasonably deviate from reserve funding requirements subject to specified reactions. Also, number 2, provide that the governing body may set a minimum cost of repair or replacement for reserve expense. Next, authorize the governing body to determine additional essential or critical purposes for reserve funding prioritization and makes various clarifying and technical corrections related. I want to move the amendments in the bill. We're favorable.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the 9 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, recognize the minority leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. If the floor leader would continue to yield, please.
Senator may proceed.
Thank you very much. This goes back to the legislation we passed in 2022 requiring the reserve studies, correct?
I assume I wasn't here.
Is that?
I took a break. Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Yes, I was here.
Thought you've been here. Okay,
I've
you might
been
not.
gone 4 years. I was gone 4 years. I forget which year. Yeah.
Well, we missed you during those 4 years.
Thank you. You're wonderful.
Thank you. Just in respect to that, I know it became, as those reserve studies were being processed and the new potential for assessments came up, that became a concern to many that were on fixed incomes on how that was going to be handled. In this case, in the bill here, you've got some additional funding options for that. Is that accurate? And could you maybe explain how those funding options would work to help try to have the residents of these condo associations and HOAs make sure that the reserve studies and requirements are in place?
Just a minute, getting a clarification on the answer now.
Mr. President, if we can get, they've got 9 amendments on it. Can the bill and the amendments lie over into the rule, and I can get together with the sponsor and get these questions addressed?
All right, Senator's motion is in order. The bill and the amendment will lie over.
We'll do that. Okay, thank you very much.
Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 107, Senator Sidnor, Evidence, Interception of Oral Communications, Fair Housing Testing, favorable.
Recognizing the bill sponsors, the floor leader.
Thank you very much. Senate Bill 107 creates a framework for the fair housing testers to record oral communications for evidence for purposes to only enforce federal, state, and local fair housing laws. This bill passed this body last year but died in the House. There were no committee amendments. I asked for the favorable committee report, for movement of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the favorable committee report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the favorable committee report is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill or its title? Recognize the senator from District 4.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues,
Senator,
actually, if
on amendment or on
the floor leader would yield for a question.
The floor to yield. Senator may proceed.
Senator, would this create a new category within Maryland's two-party consent rule as far as recording someone without their authority, without their authorization?
It would create an exception in a commercial context, yes.
Okay, and so when these people are trying to get fair housing, this is going to be like basically for testing. These people are going to be allowed to violate the two-party consent rule for testing for these types of suspected housing issues where they may not be providing equal opportunities for everyone. Is that correct?
No, that's not correct. They wouldn't be violating if we pass this legislation. And
oh, I'm sorry. Did I say violating? I apologize.
And if I might point out, and I shared this with some of our colleagues earlier this morning, because sometimes when you think about fair housing, we have this very narrow view of what fair housing is and who might be protected by this. But just this summer, our Attorney General ended up having to sue because of a violation on the Eastern Shore where you had a landlord sexually harassing people, which is prohibited under the fair housing law. So you had a manager asking for sexual favors in order, and which now they're being sued. So this particular bill would allow for, like I said, the recording of communications by fair housing testers who have been trained and gone through a program that are a part of a nonprofit organization that does this.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. I mean, that seems very or wholly inappropriate, as my colleagues like to point out at times. My question is, do we currently afford the same opportunity for victims of domestic abuse who are in fear of their personal safety or well-being? If someone is a victim of domestic assault, they are in fear of serious bodily injury or even worse because of past treatment, do we afford them this same courtesy by being able to allow them to record an incident on their phone while it's in their pocket, while their abuser abuses them? Do we afford them that same opportunity right now, or would they be, if they reported said offense and handed over their phone with the recording on it to the state's attorney, would they be in violation of the two-party consent rule and thereby a felon?
There are a few questions in that one, but to answer, that will be being considered by this body.
What's being considered?
There's a House bill that is coming over, and we'll be reconsidering.
Okay, but my question is still, do we have anything in the law right now for people who are in immediate fear of serious bodily injury or harm to allow them to record on their phone or other ways that protects them, or in the unfortunate circumstances where they might be assaulted and die as a result of this assault, a domestic violence assault, is that allowed to be used in criminal prosecution, or would that be under the hearsay rule?
We're going to be considering a House bill that's going to address that particular topic. This is about fair housing.
Can we agree that the severity and the immediacy of being able to protect oneself is a very high, this body should be taking this on a much higher level of sincerity than we currently have? And I guess what I'm saying is we're moving this bill forward to create an exception that's never been done, but we're not doing anything for those victims that are being assaulted to protect themselves.
So besides, again, saying that the bill is coming over, what I also want to make clear to the body is that what is being asked for in this particular bill is commonplace across the United States. We're in the minority when we talk about the ability to put a phone and record a conversation for a commercial purpose. And this just puts Maryland in line with a majority of the country.
Are we in the majority or minority as the state of Maryland for a two-party consent rule when someone's in fear of their serious bodily injury? And Thank you.
Thank
Mr.
you.
President, I'd like to special order this bill for the purposes of an amendment.
All right, senators moved to special order the bill. Let's hear from the floor leader.
I would urge the body to resist that.
All right. On the special order, recognize the minority whip.
I'm rarely rendered speechless, but we can't give until the afternoon session for a substantive amendment. We've just heard that we're going to have an exemption for Maryland's ironclad two-party consent law, not for a law enforcement officer trying to figure out if somebody going to report they've been beaten up by a husband, or not for suspected of drug activity or some other terrible violent type crime, or child abuse or sexual abuse, where you could prove it because you could secretly record it. We don't allow exceptions for that. We're going to allow exception for housing inspections, and we can't have a special order for a couple hours so we can think if there might be some amendments to the bill.
I rescind my opposition for the afternoon.
Okay, well, let's just see. All right, the question was to special order until the second session today.
That's fine.
Is there
That's fine.
No objection to the?
No objection.
All right. There is no. Floor leader has no objection.
Thank you, Mr. President.
All right. Motion. Any objections from the floor? Without objection, the bill will be special order at the appropriate time this afternoon. All right, clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 120, Senator Muse, restrictions on use solar collector systems, alteration, favorable.
Recognizing the bill sponsors, the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, this bill alters statutory provisions that prohibit unreasonable restrictions on land use related to the installation of a solar collector system under specified circumstances. The bill specifies that a restriction on use is unreasonable if application of the restriction to a particular proposal, 1, increases the installation cost of the system by at least 5% over the projected cost of the initially proposed installation, or 2, reduces the energy generated by the solar collecting system by at least 10% below the projected energy generation in the initial proposal. The bill further specifies actions that a community association may take in regard to the installation of solar collector system in the common areas or common elements of the development. There are no amendments, so you move favorable on the bill.
All right, the floor leader moves to the adoption of the favorable committee report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the favorable committee report is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 120 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 150, Senator Watson, real property, recordation, land records, requirements, favorable, 2 amendments.
All right, recognizing the bill sponsors, the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. This bill generally alters various statutory provisions relating to the filing, maintenance, and transmittal of land records. Among other provisions, the bill alters numerous formatting requirements, authorizes the acceptance of documents received through an electronic recordation system, authorizes court clerks to refuse to record instruments that fail to meet specified requirements, authorizes court clerks to assess additional fees for the recordation of subdivision plats if required by local law, repeals certain requirements and references related to bound books and microfilm, and makes numerous stylistic and technical changes. There are 2 committee amendments. Amendment 1 restores language requiring an instrument offered for recordation to be printed in not less than 8-point type, and authorizes the clerk to index each property in a certain way. And Amendment 2 has 2 components. First, it removes the provisions authorizing clerks to refuse to record instruments that fail to meet specified requirements, and replaces it with the requirement that the clerk cannot be held liable for a document that is not scanned or recorded properly because the document did not meet the specified requirements. And then secondly, it restores language requiring the clerk to index certain instruments the same way that mortgages are indexed. There was no opposition to the bill. The vote of the committee was unanimous. I hereby move the adoption of the 2 committee amendments as well as the favorable committee vote.
All right, floor leader moves to the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 150 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 349, Senator Love, medical debt, complaints for money judgment and real property liens, favorable with one amendment.
Recognize the bill sponsors, the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, in 2021, this body unanimously passed legislation sponsored by the chair of EEE that prohibited hospitals from placing a lien on a person's home for unpaid bills. That important legislation covered about a half of people's medical debt. This bill, SB 349, covers the other half, so medical debt from private practices, dental care, long-term medical care, etc. There is one committee amendment. The committee amendment narrows the definition of medical debt, and it removes the award of economic damages to a prevailing property owner under the bill. With the amendments, we address the objections from the opposition. I move the one amendment and the favorable committee report.
All right, floor leader moves to the adoption of the one committee amendment and the favorable committee report. On the amendment, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the one committee amendment is adopted. Question now on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 349 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 566, Senator Sidnor, real property, filing fee for residential mortgage foreclosure increase, favorable with one amendment.
Recognizing the bill sponsors, the floor leader.
Thank you very much. Senate Bill 566 is a very simple and straightforward bill which increases the filing fee, or did increase the filing fee that must accompany an order to docket or a complaint to foreclose a mortgage or deed of trust on a residential property. There was one committee amendment as originally coming in. The bill would have increased that fee from $300 to $600. The amendment lowers the fee from $600 to $450. Mr. President, I move the adoption of the amendments and favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the one committee amendment and the favorable committee report. On the amendment, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the one committee amendment is adopted. Question now on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 566 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 606, Senator West, residential real property tenants, right of first refusal, favorable.
Recognizing the bill sponsors, the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. This bill clarifies the circumstances under which liability for the failure to comply with the existing statutory requirements relating to a tenant's right of first refusal to purchase a residential property is restricted to the owner of the property and does not attach to the property. There are no committee amendments. There was no opposition to the bill. The vote of the committee was unanimous. I hereby move the adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the favorable committee report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the favorable committee report is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 606 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 896, Senator Love, real property, residential rental property, pet policy disclosure, pet policy transparency act, favorable two amendments.
Recognizing the bill sponsors, the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. SB 896 seeks to help people keep their pets when they are renting property. The bill requires that a landlord of any residential property provide a link to the property's pet policy if they have a website, and that they provide a copy of the pet policy or a summary of it when someone applies for that property. There are two amendments. Number one is technical. Number two struck requirements that the landlord must provide a link to the pet policy in digital advertisements and in any information provided for a residential search engine. Move the two amendments and the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the two committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, yes, recognize
Will the floor
Senator.
leader yield just for a quick
Floor
question?
leader yield. Senator may proceed.
Just clarifying, this doesn't prevent a landlord from disallowing pets. They just have to make it very transparent that no pets.
Exactly.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Any further discussion of the two amendments? Any objection to the committee amendments? Without objection, the two committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 896 is hereby ordered, printed for third reading. Let's see if we need to get any of these. We got a special order calendar number 25. This is, clerk will read the bill.
Senate Bill 306, Senator Bidel, Workers' Compensation, Prescription Drug and Pharmaceutical Services, Reimbursement. Question is on the adoption of the two committee amendments and the favorable report.
All right, question is on the two committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the two committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 306 is hereby ordered, printed for third reading. Let's go to Special Order Calendar 27. Clerk will read the bill.
Senate Bill 361, Senator Hester, Election Law, Influence on Voters' Voting Decision by Use of Fraud, Prohibition. Question is on the adoption of the favorable report.
All right, let's see. This is on the favorable report. Question is on the favorable report. Recognize the minority whip on the report.
Thank you, Mr. President. I apologize. I do have an amendment here, which I'll go ahead and distribute. Oh, wait.
We're on the
sorry.
report. That's
I'm
right.
sorry.
Let's
Can I clarify what my objections were, and then we'll do the amendment when we're done adopting the report? Is that?
That worked. Just question for the floor leader?
Yeah, may I ask the floor leader a question on the bill?
Yes, as the
We've
floor
discussed
leader
it a little as
yield.
well, so it's not a surprise.
Senator now may proceed.
Yes, thank you. And I had a nice conversation with some other folks as well that understand this issue very well. So the goal here is to outlaw someone using artificial intelligence to create an image that is demonstrably false and portrays something that did not happen as though it did to deceive voters. That's correct?
That is correct.
Okay. As I looked at the bill, I had a little bit of heartburn and still have some concerns over the way the bill, it's a little bit, I thought it was maybe a little bit broad. I was concerned about image versus video and audio. If somebody creates a fake video of an elected official or a candidate talking and they're saying something that they did not in fact say, I think that's very fair, that's deceptive. Same with audio, and I know we had a terrible situation in a school system where somebody created fake audio that caused a problem. So all of that made sense to me. I think with images, we know how popular things on the internet have become. People create an image of somebody, that's satirical. Could you just comment on kind of if you have some comment on how can we make sure it's not just an image of somebody, selected official holding a money bag for higher taxes when that's obviously not. Can you talk about the difference between that and something that's truly deceptive?
Sure. So the point is that this is fraud, and it's something that would happen that really didn't happen with the intent to influence the voter's decision, either to vote or not to vote, or about who to vote for. And so that is a fairly high bar.
And let me to clarify, the high bar is because fraud, I noticed fraud wasn't defined in the bill, but it is defined in other parts of the statute. It's literally the legal definition of fraud is what has to be proven, and it has to be proven by the state prosecutor in front of a court of law. It's not just the State Board of Elections decides we think that's fraudulent, correct?
Exactly.
Okay. And the process, and I think the questions I was asking and why I held the bill was, what's the process? So let me be sure I've got the process right. Someone identifies something they view as fitting the bill here, whether it's a video, audio, image, that they believe is fraudulent. And this is going to happen a lot if we pass this bill. There's going to be a lot of people who are going to accuse people of doing this, even if maybe it doesn't meet a standard. So it goes to the State Board of Elections first, correct? Somebody can complain to the State Board of Elections.
Somebody would complain to the State Board of Elections, but I don't think it's going to be as frequent as you just suggested.
Well, I hope not, but I have a feeling that people are going to, my concern was, and sort of continues to be, that people are going to say, I don't like the way this mail piece looks, I don't like the way this digital video or digital ad looks, I think it's deceptive. But the standard here is very clearly, it has to be something that is clearly fraudulent, like someone is, harming someone in the picture, like it happened, as opposed to Senator so-and-so doesn't like kids, right? It has to be like something that actually depicts some sort of act that is fraudulent. Am I getting that right?
Yes, that did not actually happen in reality.
Okay.
And so, like, other examples of fraud are like embezzlement, forgery, romance fraud, bid rigging. I mean, this is like a big deal. So, for example, when if you get a fake audio recording from a president saying, "Hey, don't vote in the primary," that would clearly be fraud.
Yeah, and I think I know we agree on that, and that's to me really where I came down on this was more the image side of things, because obviously images are everywhere, and on the internet we've seen on. And part of my concern with this bill overall has been, I don't want the appearance of squelching dissent. And here in Maryland, we have folks who are getting riled up about some things that have been proposed, which we won't get into with this bill. Nationally, there's national issues that get maybe different people riled up, and so I'm just trying to be sure we're very precise here. If it goes to the State Board of Elections, they can choose to either say, no, that's not, or they can say, we think it is, or it's serious enough beyond just. My understanding from the director is that they could say to somebody, they could go to the person, they could contact the entity involved and say that you really need to not do this anymore, or they could go as far as referring it to the state prosecutor, correct? I mean, if they felt it was egregious enough.
Correct.
And once it's referred to the state prosecutor, they could choose to take action, or they could say it doesn't rise to that level. And if they say it rises to the level, then it would go to a court proceeding.
That is correct.
Okay. And there really is no injunctive relief here. So it's not that you're going to get the State Board of Elections, not you, but the bill would get the State Board of Elections into picking sort of winners and losers over this mail piece is okay, but that digital ad's not okay. That's not the goal with this bill, correct?
That is not the goal of this bill.
Okay. It's to have a remedy for actual illegal behavior.
Correct.
Okay. I really appreciate your answers. I still have a little bit of a concern on the image side, Mr. President, but I understand, and I definitely wanted to establish, I think the intent of the bill is very good. So, Mr. President, I'll sit down and I may have an amendment in a moment.
All right, on the report, any further discussion on the report? Any objections to the committee report? Without objection, the report is adopted. Senator has an amendment? Pages will collect and distribute the senator's amendment. All right, Senator may explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. On the page 2 of the bill, it's a short bill, there's the definitions of synthetic media, which is mentioned in the new law here. Synthetic media means an image, an audio recording, or video recording that has been intentionally created or manipulated with the use of generative artificial intelligence or other digital technology to create a realistic but false image, audio recording, or video recording, and then it goes on to outline a little more detail about what that might look like. I struggle with image, but I understand, I don't believe that an amendment to strike image was going to be accepted, and I'm not sure if this one will either, but one other thing that had been raised by some of the testimony was the concern about, nobody has a problem saying don't use AI to do this, but the other digital technology is a little bit open-ended. So what I think the intent is to say if you use AI or other technology that's similar, so I thought it would be good to just add in after other on line 3, just to say other similar digital technology, just to further refine the idea that this is other digital technology being used like AI to manipulate, not somebody creating a picture of an elected official in front of a bank claiming they're robbing the bank because they raised taxes, or they're shutting down something because they're cutting a government, whatever. I'm not trying to get into the politics. So I felt like if we just put the word similar, that might at least help tighten that digital technology a little bit more. So I would move the amendment, Mr.
All right,
President.
Senator moves the amendment. Let's hear from the floor leader.
I would urge the body to resist this amendment. And while I really appreciate the good senator sharing it with me in advance and his intent to tighten the definition, I believe this actually broadens the definition. And that is because we're going to spend a whole lot of time discussing what is similar other digital technology. I mean, think about it like this. In this bill, we're not criminalizing deepfakes. We're saying if they're used in a fraudulent manner, that is illegal. So like if you compare it to a hammer, we're not criminalizing a hammer, but if it's used in a murder weapon, that's great. So what is similar to a hammer? What is similar to a deepfake? It just makes the definition unworkable. So I resist the amendment, Mr. President.
All right. On the amendment, are there any further discussion of the amendment? All in favor of the amendment, say aye. Opposed, nay. Amendment does not pass. Not pass. It was very close. Very close. A little bit of doubt, but not much. Not much. All right. All right. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 361 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Senator from the 45th, we have a second round, same school, if you wanted to welcome them.
Thanks, Mr. President. I love coming around for the second bite at the apple. It looks like, colleagues, that we talked about it earlier, and then my other colleague talked about he was an alumni of Moravia Park Primary. I'm going to call it Moravia Park Elementary School. If y'all can stand, get y'all shout out, get y'all hand clap.
Welcome, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. I see we have some safety patrols. I don't know if that's still the same word. I've got these memories of my 5th grade year walking in the rain, and yeah, that's it. Ours were orange. We had orange ones, orange ones. Yeah. Of course, come on, All right, all right. Let's go to where are we? We've got Special Order number 28. Clerk will read the bill.
Senate Bill 929, Senator Brooks, Work Group on Mail-in Ballot Accessibility. Question is on the adoption of the one committee amendment and the favorable report.
Recognizing the Vice Chair of the committee. Let's see, we are on the committee amendment. Any discussion of the committee amendment? Any objections to the committee amendment? Without objection, the committee amendment is adopted. Question is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Senator has an amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. We are waiting on an amendment, and so sadly, I'm going to ask whether we can special order until this afternoon. Council is working on it now.
Sure. All right. Senators move to special order the bill. Any objections? Without objection, we will special order it to the appropriate time to the second session today. All right. Let's see. We have our floor leader back. Let's go to 26. Clerk will read the bill.
Senate Bill 544, Senator Bailey, Food Establishments Portable Chemical Toilets. Question is on the adoption of the favorable report.
The question is on the adoption of the favorable committee report. Recognize the senator from the 28th.
Thank you, Mr. President. This bill is deeply troubling to me, as is, and we've done so much work on the environment as a body over the years. And I was so happy yesterday afternoon. After a long session on the floor, long sessions in committee, bill hearings, and voting, I went for a walk down to the waterfront. And then I drifted on to the Naval Academy grounds, scanned my ID, went on and walked straight along the waterfront, and I looked at the water, and I was really amazed. That water was so clear. I could see like 2 feet down in the bay. I've never seen it like that. And I've done a lot of fishing and sailing, boating on the bay over the years. It was amazing. Our administration, the Moore administration, is doing a great job with working with Pennsylvania, working with the other states around the bay to clean it up. And this morning I bumped into the Secretary of Agriculture. He said, hey, yes, we're really working hard to clean up the bay. And it's so exciting to see this progress that's being made. And thought about this bill, which has absolutely no guardrails on handling of sewage. This is what is sewage. I mean, we get a lot of laughs from it, but this is sewage, human waste we're talking about. And the Maryland Department of Health and Environment put in requests for amendments on this bill to safeguard our water supply, our waterways from fuel spills. Yesterday, the floor leader did a lot of research and no issues with fuel spill. Well, I went and I did some research too. Do a Google search. Let's see. I brought it up here. The search was simple. It was sewage spill in Maryland. And wow, what popped up. In Maryland, recent sewage spills have led to waterway closures and shellfish advisories, particularly in Anne Arundel County, and Worcester County, with a 14 million gallon overflow in Baltimore City, highlighting a broader issue of infrastructure issues and the need for upgrades. Recent incidents: Severna Park, Anne Arundel County. A forced main break caused a large sanitary sewage overflow in the 800 block of Ritchie Highway, with 16,200 gallons entering Cypress Creek. DPW crews addressed the area with lime and vacuuming, with the Anne Arundel County Department of Health issuing an emergency closing for the headwaters of the southern branch of Cypress Creek to Dill Road and Oak Grove Circle for 7 days. It continued. Glen Burnie, Anne Arundel County. An emergency closure was issued for Marley Creek between Brewers Island and Marley Creek Drive due to a sewage spill, estimated over 10,000 gallons originating from a pump failure. Then they go on to Manklin Creek in Worcester County. Emergency closure for shellfish harvesting in Manklin Creek was issued following a sewage spill on February 7th, with the closure for also impacted Isle of Wight Bay and Sinnapuxon Bay. Baltimore City, a recent sewage spill, estimated 14 million gallons, highlighted the ongoing issue of city's aging infrastructure and the need for upgrades. I know the former governor, Republican governor, was sued by our Attorney General to enforce environmental laws, to clean up these things, to clean up the bay. We have to sue the prior administration. This administration here is working hard, and we don't have to sue them to get the job done. And here this bill comes, no guardrails on porta toilets all over the state. No guardrails. The departments came and said, hey, there should be some guardrails. Send in testimony, we recommended these amendments. And when I went back to my office after the floor session yesterday, lots of emails from lots of folks saying, hey, thank you for standing up for the environment, Ellis. We appreciate that. Whoop. Request to use the senator's name. And I apologize for that, Mr. President. And so it's an issue. We're working hard to protect the environment. And here we're taking a step back here. I don't know what's the rush in passing this bill. We're not listening to our experts. Our experts. Now, I'm no expert, even though I was an agricultural chemist major in college. I'm no expert in this. Even though I love the environment, I'm no expert in this. The experts sent in information on possible amendments to this bill to put guardrails to make it sanitary for the state of Maryland. And here, when my staff worked, put out a bunch of amendments on different sewage spills throughout Maryland and the nation. Riviera Beach, Florida, sewage got into the water supply, bacterial infection, everything like that. They had to close that down for a little while. We all know about Michigan, what happened in Michigan, polluted drinking water. Jackson, Mississippi, polluted drinking water. Here our health department is saying, hey, control your sewage. And we as a body is rushing through this bill to say, no, we're not listening to our professionals. I'm deeply troubled with that because I drink this water. I don't know about you, but I drink my water in Maryland. I love my water, my well water, and I don't want sewage spills in it. The floor leader said yesterday he's not aware of amendment requests from the Maryland state agencies. Not aware of it. Well, okay, I'm not questioning his veracity, but I'm aware of it. I saw it in the bill folder, and I brought it up in committee and say, hey, we're not going to do that. We're going to really get this in. I'm not sure of what alliances is happening now. I'm kind of a loss with why we want to turn our backs on our health folks and our environmental folks and not continue to protect issues that I thought we care about. So, I could go through and try to go and read all the additional fuel spills that, sewage spills that happened in recent months throughout Maryland and throughout the United States and even in Europe. I have a lot of articles on these problems that we're rushing to create in Maryland with this bill. It's deeply troubling to me, and the amendments that were offered.
So, Senator, just very briefly, we don't have the amendment. We're on the report. On the report,
yes. And so,
does the senator have an amendment?
I have an amendment, Mr. President.
We have to get through the report first.
Okay.
Does Senator want to continue the report, or should we see if we can get the report through and we'll get to the amendment?
Okay, so procedural, in the interest of time, I don't want to get between the body and lunch, so we can move to procedurally.
Let's see, on the report, is there
follow through.
Any further discussion on the report? Any objections to the adoption of the report? Without objection, the report is adopted. The senator has amendments. The pages will collect and distribute the senator's amendments.
Okay, let me grab one here. Okay, thank you.
Give us just a moment. All right, there it goes. Senator may explain the amendment.
Yeah. So this amendment came straight from the experts at our wonderful state agencies, not from Ellis, but from the experts, saying that a food establishment that provides a chemical toilet on the subparagraph 1 of this paragraph may not provide the chemical toilet for more than 90 consecutive days and shall remove the chemical toilet within 10 days after the 90-day period ends. So we keep track of where these toilets are. People just don't stick them someplace next to a well and forget about them, and the toilets will basically rot and leak because things happen. And so this is a reasonable amendment from the health environmental folks, courtesy of Senator from District 28. I'd like for everyone to go on record, Mr. President, call roll call vote to see their position on listening to our health experts.
All right, senators move the amendment. Let's hear from the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I appreciate that the good senator from Charles County and my friend in the Finance Committee provided us with a copy of the amendment. What I would ask at the moment, Mr. President, is that the bill and the amendment be laid over to the appropriate time tomorrow.
The senator's motion is in order. The bill and the amendment will lay over until the appropriate time at the second session.
Thank you, Mr. President.
All right.
Mr. President?
Yes, Senator.
I have a bunch more amendments from recommended. Should we go through those now, or because Bill's
the
laid
bill
over?
is laid over. It's an automatic motion, so it'll come up for the
Okay.
second session today.
Okay.
After we dispose of this one when it comes back up.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Excellent. All right.
Disposal.
Thank you. All right. Let's go to, where are we here? Are we still B&T? Yeah. Okay. Let's do that. Let's get through B&T, see if we can. This is report number 7. Clerk will read the first bill.
Senate Bill 136, Senator Folden, Education Safe Schools Fund Grant Allocations, favorable with 2 amendments.
Recognize the Vice Chair of the Committee as the floor
Thank you,
leader.
Mr. President. This is a Safe Schools Fund, where there's a grant program that local school systems can apply to improve the safety of the schools. It's done every year, and some years not all the money allocated for school system is used. And under current law, that money cannot be reallocated to other school systems that do put in applications. And basically, that's what this bill does, is allow the reallocation of unspent funds in a particular year. There's an amendment that also notifies the school systems what the status is of the money that's in the fund twice a year. Move the amendments and the favorable report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report, recognizing the senator from the 22nd on the amendments.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a question for the floor leader on the bill.
Will the floor leader yield?
Right here.
Senator may proceed.
Sure, I'm sorry.
Does this include funding from is this only the funds at the excuse me, are these only for funds that have not been applied for yet?
Yes.
Or if the school system applies for the funds?
Applied for and granted.
Correct. If they're granted to the school system, but they are not used at the school system level, does this apply?
This does not cover that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. On the 2 amendments, any further discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 136 is hereby ordered printed for 3rd reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 409, Senator King, Economic Development, County or Municipal Corporate Economic Development Authority Powers and Use of Proceeds, favorable with 4 amendments.
Recognizing the bill sponsor is the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 409 deals with economic development authorities, usually called industrial development authorities, that local governments use for development. First, the bill expands the definition of authority to include a revenue authority or a redevelopment authority, and expands the powers of an authority. The bill provides that an authority may receive money from a public, private, and nonprofit source to fund the authority's activities, powers, and duties in accordance with statute. The bill authorizes an authority to issue bonds in accordance with an ordinance adopted by the governing body that created the authority and expands the eligible uses of tax increment financing and bond proceeds. There are 4 committee amendments. First is technical. The second and third amendments add some additional checks and balances to the local governing body to identify actions of the authority in carrying out a development plan that requires the approval of the local government. For authorities created after October 1st, 2025, the amendment gives auditing and oversight powers to the local governing body, and it requires a report to the local governing body. Fourth Amendment strikes provisions related to Baltimore City from the bill, and I move adoption of the committee amendment and the favorable committee report.
All right, floor leader moves to the adoption of the 4 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 4 committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 409 is hereby ordered printed for 3rd reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 596, Washington County Senators, Washington County Property Tax Credit Economic Development Projects, favorable with 2 amendments.
Recognize the senator from District 2 as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 596 alters an existing local property tax credit in Washington County for real property owned or leased by a new or expanding business that creates new jobs. There are 2 committee amendments. The first is technical. The second amendment exempts property owned by the Hagerstown Multi-Use Sports and Events Facility that is used for certain purposes from state and local taxation, thus creating parity with other similar facilities throughout our state. Move the adoption of the committee favorable report.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the two committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill? Oh, yes. Recognizing the Senator from Prince George's on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. President. Could the chair of
Will the floor be
Washington,
yield? Yes. Senator may
yield,
proceed.
please? Okay. Y'all bear with me because I've had a busy 2 days. The birthday girl has had two days of being very busy. Just want to ask one question.
Yes, ma'am.
If you own a house up in Washington County, you're eligible for a property tax credit.
What was the question again? I'm sorry.
If you own a house in Washington County, are you eligible for this tax credit?
No, this has to do with businesses.
Just businesses.
And economic development, and creating jobs.
That's for economic development.
Correct.
Okay, I just want to be clear on that. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Any further discussion? Any amendments to the bill? Seeing none, Senate Bill 596 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 666, Senator Gazzone, Maryland Community Action Agencies funding, favorable with one amendment.
Recognizing the senator from the 45th as the floor leader.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 666, as amended, requires the governor for fiscal 2027 through 2030 to include $250,000 in the annual budget and appropriation to the Department of Housing and Community Development to be used solely as operating grants to eligible community action agencies. There is one amendment, Mr. President. The amendment sets the funding at $250,000 per year for fiscal years FY 2027 to 2030. Move adoption of the committee report, Mr. President.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the one committee amendment and the favorable committee report. On the amendment, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the one committee amendment is adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 666 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 829, Senator Hayes, State Procurement Minority Business Enterprise Program Extension and Reports, favorable with two amendments.
Recognize the senator from the 27th as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, Senate Bill 829, as amended, extends the sunset date for the Minority Business Enterprise Program to July 1, 2026. The bill also extends the due date for the related disparity study to September 30th, 2025, and extends the sunset and due dates for the MBE's contracting requirements and related disparity analysis under current law. There are two amendments. One's technical. The second includes disparity study provisions related to public-private partnerships inadvertently omitted from the original bill. Move adoption of the committee report.
All right, floor leader moves to the adoption of the two committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objection? Without objection, the two committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 829 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. All right, so we've been trying to figure out the schedule for tonight. So I think we are going to pause now. We have a 1 o'clock and a 3 o'clock that could go for a little while. We are going to peg, I think, 7 o'clock tonight to come back. We'll see how things are going. We'll see how long it goes for the hearing in B&T. So lots of witnesses at that one, yeah. 110 witnesses, okay. So, to the degree we can be as efficient as possible in B&T from 3 to 7, we'll see what we can do. So let's peg 7 o'clock. All right, let's check in with the Chair of Finance. Committee announcements.
I think Finance will meet at 1:30 for voting session.
1:30, all right. Education, Energy, and the Environment.
Thank you, Mr. President. We don't have any bill hearings today, but at 1 p.m. we're at the joint hearing room for a joint briefing with the Economic Matters Committee on the rising costs of energy. And so that we'll retreat after that to do some voting immediately after the briefing. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Chair Budget Tax.
3 o'clock hearing.
All right. Judicial proceedings.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Judicial Proceedings Committee will meet again at 3 p.m. for a voting session.
3 o'clock. Standing committees. Yes, Chair rules. Or Jewish Caucus?
Baltimore County delegation, can we please meet in the red room immediately following floor? Thank you.
All right. Any other delegations? Select committees, joint committees? Senator from the 34th district? The senator from the 27th district?
Yes, Mr. President. Colleagues from Prince George's County, just stay flexible. We're working on our delegation meeting. Thank you.
Excellent. Senator from Baltimore City delegation?
Thank you, Mr. President. Baltimore City delegation, please check your emails for a location and time TBD for a vote.
All right. Minority Whip?
Thank you, Mr. President. Republican caucus members, be flexible as well. We may want to meet before the evening session. We will communicate, but I know different committees have different schedules, but just be on the lookout for messages for the Republican caucus. Thank you.
Excellent. All right. Any further announcements? Just look, before we go for the afternoon, it's Wednesday of crossover week. This is when that box breathing exercise is of highest need. You know, deep breaths. Everyone is doing their best. This is a tough time. There's lots of bills and committees. Everybody wants their bills moved. Please, to the degree feasible, we're all trying to not take things personally. It's tough because stress is high, people are amped. Just remember this afternoon and tonight we're all doing our best. We all come here for our best reasons, and we're going to get through this week. So just keep that in mind. All right. Any further announcements? Senator from the 34th, Hartford County? No. Senator from Hartford County? No. Nope. 34? No? Announcement? Okay, guess not. All right. Okay. In that case, let's do a quorum call before we adjourn.
Mr. President?
Has everyone recorded their presence? If so, the clerk will take the call. With 47 members in the chamber and a quorum being present, the Senate of Maryland remains in session, recognizing the Majority Leader.
Mr. President, will the chamber be secure this afternoon?
Probably not.
Probably not.
Let's say no. Yeah, probably not.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, I move the Senate of Maryland stand adjourned until 7 p.m. this evening.
All right, without objection, so ordered. We will see you all this evening.